You know, all eyes are on you in a thing like that. Except if people had been watching Kurt Masur at that during that, I think they would have seen a singular intensity and concentration that meant he was not doing a perfunctory accompaniment to what you were doing. And I wonder what that attitude, what effect that has on your performance, one way or the other.
Well, I think I usually get very nervous when I play. And one of the great thrills of being on stage with Mr. Mazur is that he's so intense and he's so committed that you don't have as much time to be nervous. You get too involved. It's so exciting.
So you feel less nervous with that?
Yeah, you just don't have time for that. You're so caught up in the spirit of the music, and it's just incredible.
You
it's
sure
a great thrill.
That.
What an honor to play with him and the New York Philharmonic. It's
in a moment I want to talk about the cadenza at the end of the first movement. Before we get to that, it wasn't that long after he'd written that first piano concerto that he wrote his fifth symphony. And that symphony has become a household word. People that never heard a note of classical music know what the Beethoven Fifth means.
It's true.
You know?
It's true.
Now, is there been a progression that you noticed between the time he wrote it? Of course, that wasn't the first piano concerto he had attempted to write, but that was his first. And then he wrote five symphonies up to that time, and had been bothered with deafness some by the time of the second.
Right.
But what had happened in that time?
I think with Beethoven, well, with any cosmic genius on that level, it's difficult to talk about progress of a composer. You know, we have this feeling that he starts out young and he's still learning and learning and learning, and then by the time he gets to the fifth and seventh and ninth symphonies, he's learned everything. But in fact, there are threads running through his whole life, from Opus 1 to Opus 135, that somehow say Beethoven.
Really?
You know, of course, you can't sum a man like that up in one sentence, but there's always a quality, first of all, I find, of incredible joy and hope in his music.
Yeah, in spite of some personal difficulties.
In spite of incredible personal despair in his life. I mean, going deaf for a musician, well, you can imagine what that means, especially for a practicing pianist, for probably the greatest pianist of his time, not to be able to play anymore because of deafness. But there's always, well, in the Fifth Symphony, as dramatically and as forcefully and I guess as monomaniacally as it starts out, the end is an incredible triumph.
It is.
The same in the Leonora Third Overture, which we heard before, which is again a testament to hope, to joy, to happiness, somewhere down the road, you know?
I want to ask you about that, about the man himself, and how much you can sense from the music itself about the man, not from biographies, but do you feel you come to know Beethoven better by performing it, by listening?
I think one does. Well, of course, I have a picture of Beethoven from his music, which may not be right at all. I think everyone forms his own picture. But a piece like the First Piano Concerto, you kind of sense a young man at the height of his pianistic powers, because
he's
certainly
29, 30.
I would think even less, maybe.
Less than that.
Even less, probably in his early 20s.
Oh, early, yeah.
And you sense someone who comes to Vienna in order to sweep away all the other people in front of him. You know, he is the great pianist and the great improviser of his time. I mean, this cadenza, I think, probably was an improvisation that was later written down. That's what I suspect. I'd like to believe that. Now, you can imagine a man sits down to play a piano concerto, and in place of 10 or 15 or 20 bars, which are normally done in the space of this, he does this 5-minute
he got carried
fantasy of incredible pianistic display and compositional wizardry, and somehow winds up going back to C major after all of that. It's an incredible thing to do.
No, so he wrote that. If he improvised it first, he wrote it down afterward. But his handwriting was somewhat sloppy, and I just wonder how were they sure which note he intended in some cases?
You know, I think it's an incredible mystery to me that there are editors who are able to decipher what's going on. I have some copies of autographs. You know, the Appassionata, there's an autograph of that. There's an autograph of the Waldstein. It's quite evident why there are still a couple of times you'll find, oh no, there was an error in all the editions, and we've discovered that it is a G flat, not an A flat. It's
Really?
quite amazing that you can read anything at all.
Maybe it's
Those
like, you know,
things.
handwriting, like people with very bad handwriting, you can sort of decipher it after a while if
He
you're
was
good
he
at-
was definitely the prescription writer, the
Yeah.
doctor of his generation, and where you can't decipher anything, you know, and the druggist somehow makes head or tail of it. And it's the same thing with the editors that have done yeoman work for all of us.
Do you think you could get to know the man himself better through a concerto is a thing to showcase the virtuosity of a solo performer, where his symphonies were not that way? Which would enable you to know the man better, do you think?
I think in the case of someone like him, you need to know everything. I mean, we've been privileged tonight to have the Leonora 3, which is one side of his genius, then this piano concerto, which is so fresh and vital and brash in a way, and then the Fifth Symphony, where you're going to hear incredible tension that he handles. He's more aware of, I believe, he's better at handling time than any other composer. He's better at creating tension and not releasing it till the very end than anyone else in music. And you'll see, again, it's a whole different side of him. There's not a moment, I feel, in the first movement, for instance, where there are a couple of phrases that seem a little gentle, but you still feel by the time you're ready to be gentle, it's gone already. It's this constant holding you like this,
Right.
and the last note is almost a release, except that what comes afterwards is not a release at all.
Yeah.
And you need this series of, you'll hear this incredible number of C major chords at the end of the symphony.
Yes.
It's unprecedented.
And it's not
you know.
redundant. It's-
Wham, wham.
Right,
Yes,
yeah.
it's like hammer blows that never stop, and it's not redundant because you need that arrival
to do
to
what it-
counteract all the tension that you've
It
gone
is-
through from the beginning until that point.
I've sometimes thought that Anton Bruckner missed the boat a little bit by wrapping things up a little too soon. Did you ever think that?
I don't know the Bruckner symphonies well enough to talk about them. I must say, though, in the last couple of years, I've gotten to love Bruckner.
Yes, I love his music.
And I can't really tell why. I haven't really gotten my head around any of the symphonies where I could say I know what's coming from here and going to there.
No.
But it feels wonderful to
But
listen
isn't that
to
funny?
it.
You know the fifth. Anybody who knows classical music at all knows the fifth. But it never
true.
becomes trite. No matter how many times you hear it, I
it's-
always hear something new in it.
My friends in the orchestra also, we were talking about the first piano concerto, which they play so many times, you know, and they've done over and over. And we were saying, you know, this never for a minute feels stale. It's always fresh. I don't know what that quality is. I don't know. The composers that have it, I guess, are the greatest geniuses of all.
That's the mark of greatness, I guess, that they can
suppose.
stand that.
Yeah.
You know, his violin concerto, I guess it was he who made it into a piano transcription
Yeah,
also.
I'm
Have you
doing
ever-
that next year.
Oh, are
I
you?
have the privilege of doing that next year.
Right.
And,
That would seem like an impossible thing to do, to make it. He wrote it for the violin, and then he made it for the
probably-
piano.
Of course, I, being a pianist, am very chauvinistic, and I think it sounds wonderful on the piano. You'd find very few violinists that agree with that. On the other hand, there is, again, a cadenza written by him, which is for piano and timpani, which is a great reason to play the piece all by itself. So,
I sure enjoyed hearing you do that first.
Thank
and
you very much.
As soon as the intermission's over, we're going to hear the fifth.
well, I'm
And
looking forward to it very
me
much.
too. Thank you, Emanuel.
Thank you very much. Nice to speak with you.